Hey everyone, welcome back to the tax show for people who owe. I'm Dave.
And I'm Phil.
And today we're talking about inflation. More importantly, about how inflation impacts your tax debt. Now Phil, if you're carrying a tax debt, how does inflation impact it?
It's like oil and water, David. It's not good.
Oil and water, they don't go together very well. Phil, explain a little bit more as to what's happening with the tax debt during inflationary periods.
So as you know, during inflationary periods, the interest rate goes up, right? And what does this have to do with your tax debt? Well, David, every day that you don't pay your taxes, interest and penalties interest accrue. Not only do they accrue, they compound on each other.
Compound. Now, explain to the layman like me what that actually means with as far as my tax debt, how it's going to get bigger. We get calls all the time for someone who may have filed a couple years back and said, I just got a bill and it's dramatically higher than what I filed for. So Phil, let's talk about what's happened specifically with the interest and potentially penalties to make that balloon up so high.
Primarily, penalties accrue very fast, David, at the beginning of your tax balance. So as you know, taxes are due April 15th of every single year. Generally, except this year and a few years ago.
Yeah.
And the biggest culprit, I guess, is the failure to file penalty. So the first thing you do to kind of avoid this situation is file on time, right? That saves you about 4.5% a month, and that penalty caps out at 22.5%, David.
22.5%, that's egregious. Right? That's like my credit card.
But it doesn't stop there.
Oh, wow.
Right? Just because you didn't file on time, if you owe a balance, there's also the payment penalty. Failure to pay penalty accrues at 0.5% a month as long as you're not on an installment agreement. So those two things combined, you're looking at 5% a month, and the failure to pay penalty caps out at 25%.
That's a lot of numbers. Now let's go back to inflation. Now, how does that impact the entire balance I have? You talked about penalties. I understand there's also interest on that penalty and potentially the balance I'm carrying.
Right.
Explain how that works.
So with the existing tax debt, in the inflationary periods, interest rates also go up.
Oh, okay.
And interest rates are important, Dave, because on top of the penalties that accrue, interest rates will compound daily against your tax balance.
Like your credit card.
Just like your credit card.
Okay, so what is the interest based on? Are they pulling this out of the sky?
Great question. So the interest is based on the federal short-term rate plus additional 3%. Right now, it's about 0.97%, the federal short-term rate. So you're looking at about 4% annual.
So this has recently just increased because of the inflationary period we're in, right?
Correct.
Okay, so how high could we go? Is there any cap on this?
In theory, there is no cap. It really depends on the climate, economics of this current day, but in the 80s, we saw as high as 22%.
22%?
Yep.
On top of all the penalties that you just talked about earlier?
Yep, exactly.
Oh man, that's egregious. So you can see, I think Phil mentioned a technical term with me before this show that I think we all should know about. Phil, what's that technical term we call it?
The snowball effect.
The snowball effect. I'm so happy we brought Phil along to help us with those technical terms. Anyway, Phil, what if I don't start the snowball? I don't file, and I choose just to not participate with my obligation to file and pay taxes.
So even without your participation, the deadline still exists. And in theory, you owe as soon as it hits April 15th, right? And that's your obligation to pay whether or not you actually do it. So unfortunately, there's no avoiding that snowball.
So we also get a lot of calls from folks who received the notice, who didn't file, and say, I don't owe this much. What's happened?
The IRS filed their return for them, called a substitute for return.
Got it. And that's probably more egregious and potentially a lot more than you would have owed if you would have filed on your own, right?
Correct. It's the worst case scenario for your return, single, no exemptions or deductions.
Wow. So if you're carrying a tax debt or you haven't filed and trying to avoid one, I would encourage you to reach out to get professional help from us or from somebody else. If you're looking for help from Optima, you can download our app, request help that way, and figure out where you stand. Phil, any last words for everyone?
As usual, do something.
Don't start the snowball. Thank you for joining us today, everyone. We'll see you next time. Hey everyone, thank you for joining us. Be sure to like
And subscribe
to all of our YouTube videos. And if you need more information on Optima Tax Relief, please go to our website, optimataxrelief.com.